if you are in the spot of changemaker and people are just, openly accepting your ideas, I would actually question whether you are stretching them enough to where they need to go.
Brianna Sylver is a nationally recognized innovation strategist who helps Fortune 1000 organizations and city governments unlock growth, align teams, and lead through complexity. She's the founder and president of Sylver Consulting, a global research and strategy firm that blends the disciplines of market research, user experience design, and business strategy to drive transformative change. Brianna's insights have been spotlighted by Forbes, Business Week, Fast Company, PDMA, QRCA, and HSM Management. Known for her clarity and candor, Brianna delivers tools, not just talk, that help audiences take action. She joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about her career and new book, Leading Through Freefall, How Innovators Turn Turbulence into Trust, a practical guide for leaders navigating uncertainty, change, and team dynamics in high-stakes environments. Now, that's not the entire title. That's just a little bit more about the book. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Brianna.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. So excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here, and we're going to begin where I always begin these conversations, which is, where does your story as an author begin?
Yeah, where does my story as an author begin? I think for more than a decade, I have felt that there is a book in my heart to be told, but I didn't know what that book was. And I had many clients over the years basically say, oh, Brianna, you need to write a book on innovation. You need to write a book on design thinking. It always through my mind was like, the world does not need another process book on either of these two things. They all say the same thing and they all say nothing. And I don't necessarily want to add to that, right? So, I just kind of let it sit. And then in the middle of COVID, through my morning journaling, I would journal with God every morning. And he said, you're going to write a book about actioning love and business. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. I don't know what that means. And he was just like, I'll show you the way, but just that's what's going to happen. And I was like, all right, well, I'm your instrument. Use me as you will. And so it took another, couple years before what that meant started to really come to fruition. And then, 3 years until, now it published back in August of this year. So that was kind of my overall journey. But I would not say that I ever felt like I was an author. It wasn't necessarily a thing I needed to be, but it kind of found me and found the grip. And so now I have actually published a book about innovation, but it's not about the process of innovation. It's about the emotions of innovation.
So we're going to get to that book in a few, but I need to go back to this conversation with the big guy. You mentioned sort of daily writing or journaling during the pandemic, which I'm a huge fan of journaling. It's such a healing tool. For me, it's been a very healing tool, especially during a time of such great uncertainty and wild emotions. Did that message come to you in automatic writing? How did you hear it? How did you perceive that message to write the book?
Yeah, it was through automatic writing. So I do that daily. I spend roughly about the first hour to 90 minutes of every morning just auto writing. And it can be on a variety of different topics. But it usually starts with, what am I supposed to learn and do today? And so, that is the message that came through that auto writing way back when in the middle of COVID.
That's so cool. I was reading a book on, so I went down a lot of different spiritual paths and curiosity, rabbit holes, really. I lost my brother a couple of years ago, and then I lost my mother not too long after that. And so I started just searching for stuff, and I read this book on channeling and how everyone can become a channel. And I'm like, okay, well, I think I fit into that category. I'm part of everyone. And the first step that this, experienced channeler, very well known, said was to automatic writing every day. And, you will open yourself up to, messages or communications. And I think that's so cool. Did you have an intent around your automatic writing, or was it just something you just started to do?
Well, there's two parts to that question. So back in 2015, I learned that I was highly sensitive, which at that point I didn't even know what that meant. And I was like, what is that? What really is that? Right. So, as a highly sensitive person, about 20% of the population is that. And what it means is that your nervous system takes in and processes emotion and stimuli from your environment at a different and faster rate than other people, than the other 80%. So there's a lot of positives to that, and there's a lot of negatives to that. So the positives is that you have higher access to intuition, you have, deeper listening strengths, you have, usually deeper visionary strengths, these types of things. But the negative piece is that you absorb other people's energy. And so you also have a lot more anxiety, and you have a lot more receptiveness to negativity and, sort of internal talk dynamics that are unhealthy, et cetera. Right. So I learned this about myself in 2015. And so initially started auto writing as a way of really starting to manage my own energy in that process. But similar to yourself, when my mom died in 2016, that really had me going back to God in a way that I had kind of strayed before. And then in 2020, my father died as well. And so as that time went onwards, my auto writing became less just sort of like auto writing and creating a channel for whatever. And it became really a channel to discuss and be in relationship with God daily. And so that is what it is today, but it has kind of evolved over time, and it changes depending upon what's going on in life, like in terms of how much of it is asking for opinions or thoughts or, direction to, being more of a moment of prayer to, I literally auto write my daily to-do list every day too, right? Like from that space of channeling, but it has evolved over time for me.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying about being sensitive, because I feel like I'm sensitive as well, and it is a blessing and a curse, right? Because you could walk into a room and you could know that the energy's off, or for me when I was doing stand up more, I could walk on stage and know that there was just a weird vibe in the audience, and it's going to be kind of a weird night, right? It's not may not be a great night because of what you're feeling. And it happens in focus groups too. Like when I would run, I don't really run focus groups that much anymore. But when I did, and I'd walk into a room of strangers, you could feel like, okay, someone's off in here, and the energy in this room is different than it was in the previous group. And I remember doing. I was actually telling this story to someone earlier today. I was doing ethnographies with the uninsured right before healthcare reform went into law, and insurance companies needed to understand the uninsured because now they were going to market to them, because they never really marketed to them before, because it opened up a brand new market. And I remember going into the homes of the uninsured and just hearing these heartbreaking stories. A woman was telling me how she hadn't seen her sister in a few days. She goes over to visit, finds her dead on the couch. Because she didn't have insurance, didn't want to be a burden. She had cancer and nobody knew. It was, stories like that. And for me, as somebody who was feeling this person's emotions, it was hard. It was hard.
Yeah.
It made the insights richer, unfortunately. Well, it made the insights richer, but it going through it was difficult. It was
Absolutely.
a challenge.
Yeah. And even in that situation, right? Like you can read between the lines of, what they're actually saying, and then what's going unsaid. Like, I think that's the value of being highly sensitive and, being researchers. Like, this is gold to our clients. But as a professional, you have to learn how to cleanse your energy in a way.
That, and you can't exactly position yourself as the highly intuitive psychic moderator, because that's not going to win you much business.
Yeah, exactly.
The person in purchasing who's trying to evaluate a couple of different RFPs that are coming in is going to be like, oh, hey, wait a minute. Reasons to believe this person is intuitive. Well, got to give them the business.
Really?
So, I'm curious. This message comes through. It's during the pandemic. You never really saw, you never was a kid who said, I want to write a book someday. What wasn't on the bucket list of things to do. But now you've got this assignment, right? And it comes from a pretty high source. So what was the process like? How did you start it? Did you know exactly what you were going to write? Just walk us through sort of your approach to writing this book.
Yeah, so it took a little bit of multiple pathways here. So, that happened. So then I decided, I don't know, for maybe like the period of a month or 6 weeks or something, I was going to auto write every day around what does it mean to action, love, and business, right? And so I filled the whole notebook of this and really came out of that feeling like I still don't know what this means. Like I was like, I don't know. And then going down to, the intuitive piece, right? So one of the things that I do every 4 months is sit down and plan what's happening with my business, but I do it from an intuitive, heart-centered place to kind of say, okay, where do we go next, right? And so in that process, soon after that, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene came to the forefront. And I didn't at that time know much about Mary Magdalene. I didn't know much about, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, but it was just like so like in the forefront. So then I started doing some research about that. And that led me to going to a spiritual retreat around the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And that is all really around like, that is love in the pure form. And it comes back to a lot of things like, kind of all the venial sins, right? So like gluttony and, pride and like all these other things. So like that kind of became the initial like framework, if you will, for like thinking about the book. And then just sort of stopped. And I got a different call from God. So I was at church and they did a call for people to run the Chicago Marathon with the World Vision. And I was sitting there and it was just like, clearly it was just God speaking to me saying, you're going to go to the information session. And so I went to the information session and it was like, you're going to run the marathon. And I was like, I've never run a freaking mile in my life. and beyond that, I hate running. Like, what do this is ridiculous and crazy and stupid. But, that didn't leave me in terms of what I was meant to do. So it's like, okay, I'm stepping up to this challenge of running the marathon. And that whole process was a process around how to truly surrender. Because I had no idea how I was going to go from point A to point B. Like I said, I had never run a mile. Maybe in high school gym class for like whatever that award is you have to do every year, but never before otherwise and never since. And so, but I didn't know how to go from point A to point B. And I just had to follow what I needed to do the next week. And so that really got me into the practice of surrender, of just not having it all figured out. But then too, like just the internal emotional gymnastics that would happen every week going through the training for the next long run was like, it was also another act of like trying to figure out how to manage emotion and do it in spite of. And so, basically I trained for the marathon. I ran the marathon. It was a great experience. And literally the week of the marathon, that's when the publisher showed up for the book. And so, I was at a conference, a publisher was there, a friend of mine, it was her conference and she was like, hey, I think you need to talk to this publisher. And I, shared a little bit of the idea at that point in time. They were like, well, this is kind of interesting. Yeah, we're interested in this. And then, within the span of a couple weeks, I actually had a contract to write the first draft of this book. Now, it doesn't look anything like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene today, You wouldn't see the connection other than sort of the topic of love, but it was like this really weird experience. And then even now, though, it's kind of funny because the process of writing the book was essentially the same process as it was of running the marathon, because I didn't know how to go from point A to point B. Like, it felt overwhelming. Like, how could I possibly find time to write a book? And yet, I found a book coach, and they, worked with me along the way, which was a godsend. I wouldn't have gotten, I think, where I did if I hadn't had her. And so, but all I had to do was show up and do what she told me to do each week. I didn't have to know how I was going to get to the book being out.
Well, if you were not going to bring up that parallel between running a marathon and writing a book, I was going to, because there are so many similarities.
So many.
Takes time. You've got to show up every day. You've got to put in the work. Not every run is going to be great. Not every chapter is going to be great. You're going to learn a lot about yourself along the way in both endeavors. And, it's going to take a long time. Running a marathon, it's not necessarily about the race. I mean, of course it is, right? That's what you're training for, but it's really showing up every day and putting in all the work to get yourself in condition to run that race as best you can on race day. Yeah. And you find you're not racing against other people. You're really racing against yourself, because look, 26.2 miles is not a walk in the park, right? You probably had a lot of doubts,
100%.
Along the way in the race. You probably had some doubts, and you probably had some doubts about the book too. Like, what am I doing? I've never done this before. I'm not a writer. But it's showing up and doing it every day, and sort of training that writing muscle is incredibly important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even like in the, publishing it, people are like, they're like, oh, it's out there. This is so good. It's like, it's all done. I was like, I know, it is not done. Like, this is like, the published date was like the carb load dinner before I start the 26.2.
100%, because the harder work is done after the book launches.
Absolutely.
Because you've got to approach being an author like running your own business, which I know is something you know about. But yeah. you are basically a product manager at that point. You've got to think about the 4 Ps, the promotion, the pricing, the publicity, how you're going to get it out, the product itself. But then it's like doing stuff like this and constantly pitching it to people, because if you're not willing to go out and promote and talk about it, then you got to be prepared for friends and family being the only ones who are buying the thing. Yep.
Absolutely.
There's so much that goes into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, look at all these parallels between writing and running. It's 2 of my favorite things, by the way. Now, do you still run? Did you get bit by the running bug or no?
No, I actually am not sure that it was super ultimately healthy for me, because then, it spiked my cortisol. So then that has been an issue that I'm dealing with since. But
Jeez, okay.
Yeah. So basically, my doctor's like, you got to stop running, which I wasn't overly sad about, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm a runner. I've been a runner since high school. Never done a marathon, done a bunch of half marathons. Whenever I cross the finish line of a half, I'm like, I don't know how people do this times 2. But it is something you either love to do or you hate. I don't think there's an in between.
No, I don't think so either.
It's like listening to the band Rush. You either love them or hate them. You don't just like them. I love them. My wife hates them.
Yeah, I mean, I valued the training. I am glad that I did it. I think the other part that I learned through that journey was how to involve other people in the journey, which also came into a good play with the book, right? So because I was running for World Vision initially, and I was just like, okay, I'll just put down the money that I need to put down and, get it. And it'd be that's that. And then somewhere along the way, God tapped me on the shoulder again through one of those auto writing sessions and said, that's not what I had in mind. I had in mind that you were gonna leverage the people in your network and help to bring them into this mission, right? So I was like, okay, all right, that's what I'll do. And so, but I had to get into the habit of putting that out there, right, as an offer, and putting it out repeatedly as an offer. So every time I went for my long run, I put a post out saying, this is what I'm doing. And, ultimately I raised almost $9,000 in that process for World Vision. But it created that practice for me of, even when you feel like you've already sung the song a dozen times, there's still another dozen times that you can sing the song, right? And going back to your earlier comment around the promotion of the book, I mean, you got to sing this song, dozens and dozens and dozens of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you also draw that parallel of bringing other people along for the ride and into the process, because some people mistakenly think that writing is just a solitary endeavor, and obviously when you are actually writing, yeah, it can be, right? I write alone, I write at night, I write on the weekends. There's no one around, but at some point in time, you're bringing other people. You mentioned bringing a coach in, but you might have an agent who's going to have some input into what you're doing. You're going to have an editor who's going to give you some advice, and they know the business better than we do as writers. You're going to have a publisher who's going to have some say into what the cover looks like and what the title is, and there's along the way, and then there's beta readers and stuff like that. But along the way, it does not remain a solitary endeavor. You are bringing other professionals, people who know this business, along for the ride.
Absolutely. Actually, and in the book, Leading Through Freefall, like, there was actually a really interesting moment in that whole thing, because, I mean, you can probably relate to this, Mike, like, where, let me put it this way, going through the process, I now know how you have those books that start out really well, and then about halfway through the book, they no longer are any good, right? Like, I understand fully and completely how that happens now, because you really have to be like disciplined to be like, no, I am not going to let that happen, right? And so, going just, through that whole process, yeah, I got tired at one point, and I was just like, I can't write anymore, right? And so, as I went through, I lobbed off a couple chapters in the process, right? And, and also just the size of the book was getting too big. And so I get, to the last stage with the editor, and, he's like, Brianna, the third section of this book needs another chapter. And I was like, oh, no. And he's like, it needs another chapter. And he's like, and I'm thinking, like, maybe these 3 threads or, themes or whatever. And ironically, not so ironically, that was like literally the intent of one of the chapters that I had lopped off. But I just had zero energy in the tank anymore to do it. And so this is actually it was about a year ago now, that I went out to my LinkedIn community, who I had involved along the way, along this whole journey. But I went out to them and I said, I really, really need help with this last chapter, and, gave a few little details about it. But that was probably one of the most fun chapters to write, because then I had people reaching back out to me, whether they were sending me messages or they were like, oh, let's jump on the phone for 30 minutes or whatever. But it was such a moment of validation for me, because either I was coming away from those connections with good content to sort of embed into that last chapter, or the content that was coming to me was validating that what was in earlier chapters was spot on to what was in people's, collective consciousness around sort of the intent of this book. So it was just such a good way that I was like, if I do this again, I think I'd want to do it a little bit more collaboratively along the way in that way.
Well, it put some wind in your sails, it gave you a new energy. And, it's like getting feedback on something, can be very, very helpful, especially when it's positive. But it also shows how willingness your network is to lend a hand.
Yeah, they were fantastic throughout the whole process.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. I know we talked a lot about the backstory of the book, but what can you tell us about the book itself and what people can learn when they read the book?
Yeah, so the book is all around the emotional energy that happens underneath the innovation process and really like the process of transformation and change, regardless of, whether you would call yourself an innovator or not. If you are in the position of being a change maker in some form or fashion, this book is going to be relevant to you. So essentially, as I was writing the book, it became really clear to me that when you are sparking change, people go through a grief curve in that process, right? And so the very first stop on that grief curve is despair.
I thought you were going to say denial, like, oh, we don't need this. We don't need something new.
There's denial, resistance, despair, then there's anger, and then there's depression and, bargaining. You go through the whole 5 stages of grief before people are really willing to kind of be like, well, okay, maybe we need something different, right? And then, ultimately getting to that point where they're accepting it. And so if you are in the spot of change maker and people are just, openly accepting your ideas, I would actually question whether you are stretching them enough to where they need to go, right? But as change makers, we tend to experience those things like, denial and resistance and pushback and all these things. We tend to experience those internally, and again, going back to that highly sensitive piece, right? Like, did I do something wrong? Like, what have I done wrong? Like, you're like, why do you not like this? Right. You start to internalize this as your own incompetence as a leader. And so this book is saying, no, all of this emotion is actually cues that you're on the right track. And it's also cues for saying, this is how you need to meet people where they are so that you can help navigate them through the change curve. So it's set up in 3 different sections. The first section is called Suiting Up. And this is like all the things that you can kind of predict that you would need to figure out before you start a project for it to be successful. So, from things as basic as like, okay, what do we really want to get out of this? Like, what does success actually truly look like for us, right? To then, like, if we're doing an innovation project, well, what is innovation exactly? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to just kind of create like a Me Too product? Are we trying to compete a little bit better? Are we trying to like lead a whole new industry, really change the game here? So, it's kind of like either taking proactive steps to set you up for success or taking proactive steps to have sort of anchor points to kind of come back to throughout the process. Then the middle section is the free fall. And this is like all the stuff that comes out of left field that you could never predict, but you have to react to. And you hope that you're going to react with grace versus, reacting negatively in the process. And so these are things like, you wake up the next morning and the person who's leading your project is no longer with the organization, right? Or you no longer have funding, or like, joke, now you have 4 weeks left to do 4 weeks less to do the project than you thought you had, et cetera, right? So like, it's things that you have to react to and find a way through, but you cannot predict that they are going to happen. And then the third section is safe landing. And this is about like, how do you start to transition from these spaces of, more discovery, exploratory experimentation, like trying to figure out which direction you want to go, to actually moving it into an implementation roadmap that then fits into everything else that an organization would be doing, or people that you're trying to motivate to take the reins might be doing. Like, how do you help to prioritize the things that are new against the things that are old?
So it sounds like it's section 1, setting the North Star, right? What's the vision? What are we working towards? What does success look like? And then there's you say free fall, there's the challenges, there's the things that come at you. And then it's, okay, how do we take all of this and put it into action? Like get it implemented. I want to go to that second section because I think when people hear the term problems or free fall, they think it's a negative. But in my experience, that's where the excitement and fun can be, but that's where you really learn the most about yourself and what you're capable of. Is, and take it back to running. You go out, you have a nice easy 5K run, and you're not necessarily gonna grow aerobically at that point in time, but man, you do a speed workout involving hills and long intervals. That's where you push yourself, right, to get your heart rate up. That's where you get really uncomfortable. And it's important to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's where growth happens, right? That's where the growth happens. And I'm just curious as to if you share a similar point of view on that.
I 100% share that view. I mean, I think you're right. Like, the growth happens through the valley points, right? Like, when you're uncomfortable, when you feel that things are down, that's when you grow personally. But I also think that's when your collective relationships can grow, if you approach things appropriately. And that's where the book comes into play. So every chapter of the book, regardless of which section, it kind of presents the challenge that you would have. It gives a case study from my career. Then it gives you sort of the challenge of, this is what I challenge you to do differently. And then gives you a tool, a discussion guide, a workshop, a prompt, whatever it might be, something that helps you to kind of move through that situation. And then it kind of tells you what to expect if you do and what the mindset shift is. So each of those practical tools is all around how to meet yourself and or the people that you're working with, whether it's your team or your stakeholders, in those valley moments, in those moments of pushback and resistance and skepticism, and basically how to not go in on the defensive in return, because that can easily be, right? If you start, how many times have you been in a situation where people aren't hearing what's happening in your interviews, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, I don't know if we have the right people here, Mike. Did you do a good job recruiting? I don't know, right?" Like, that's a blame storm moment where they're having a hard time receiving what's coming to them in that moment. And so they're trying to figure out a way to mitigate that by pointing blame somewhere else. Now, when you're in that situation yourself, I'm just projecting how I feel in those situations here. Your blood boils a little bit. You're like, we recruited exactly who you wanted in this thing. and then, and so you could easily go in on the defense, or you can take a moment of pause and being like, okay, what is happening here is they are just in this moment of having to accept that the reality they thought they were going to hear is not the reality that they are hearing. And so how can I now then come together and meet them where they are? And then there's tools for each chapter that kind of support that type of dialogue and connection to ultimately get it to a point where they're moving through that change curve that I mentioned a little bit faster.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're so right. People do react so emotionally sometimes, especially if maybe a piece of creative isn't performing the way they thought it might.
Precisely. In my experience, the closer we are to a finished product, the deeper those blame storms become.
Well, that's why I like to say fall in love with the problem and not the solution, because
precisely,
if you can understand the problem, you can have multiple solutions to present instead of a very high fidelity, almost finished stimuli. But
100%.
Well, that's great. This book sounds amazing. I think I want to buy it for everybody on my team.
Thank you.
And I'm not just saying that because I do work with a team of UI folk in tech product management who would certainly get something out of this. So.
Well, I have some groups that are using it as a book club, so just
there you go.
As a little bit of a plug,
There you go. I always like to get to know my guests a little bit more through some pop culture questions. So, Brianna, hopefully you can play along here. But
absolutely,
I'm curious, when you were growing up, what were some of your favorite things to watch on TV?
Oh, Kids Incorporated.
Oh my gosh, KIDS, Kids Incorporated. Was there a young Tina Yothers on that show from Family Ties? I want to say
I
she
think
was
so.
on that show.
Yes. I mean, my sister and I, we would dress up with like the leg warmers, and we would like dance along in the living room with it. It was real.
So in addition to Kids Incorporated, throw out some more. What else were you watching?
Growing Pains.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, of course, right?
Show me that smile again.
And then 90210.
Oh man, that's a little bit later,
like
but
I was a drama, the drama gal, right? And then Melrose Place.
Of course, Wednesday nights at the University of Connecticut, where I went, it was 90210 followed by Melrose, and you could hear a pin drop. Days before DVRs and on-demand,
right?
If you didn't watch it, you were left out of the conversation. So you could hear a pin drop, and then if at the end of the episode it said "Stay tuned for scenes from next week," you would literally hear people cheering because you knew you were getting a new episode. I stayed with both of those shows to the very end, till Amanda and Peter were on their way somewhere. Why do I know this? Oh, God. Oh, geez. How about music? What'd you like listening to?
Oh, what did I like listening to? I was a country gal. So all country. I mean, I grew up in rural America. So like Trisha Yearwood, Reba McEntire, those were some of my faves.
All right. Very cool. I love country music. But, I don't necessarily love modern country music. My wheelhouse is probably in the 2000s, the early aughts. Some of this new stuff I can't vibe with. I don't know. It's just...
Yeah, no, I'm actually the same. I'm not a big, country aligned today. Like 90s into, the early 2000s, yeah. I even one time was in a regional competition for country music.
Oh, you don't say. What kind of line dancing competition or what kind of competition?
No, singing.
Really?
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I totally bombed it ultimately.
Oh, sure.
I did really great for the preliminaries, and then we ended up on the stage at the fair. And
there's nothing more country than winding up on the stage at the fair, by the way.
But what was crazy is that they had never allowed us to practice. And it was the very first time I had been on stage in that type of setting that you can't hear yourself sing. And so there was no inner ear type of technology. So it was it was a big thing. But I was very theatrical in the whole process because that was sort of my thing. So I did get good points for that.
Did you wind up Peter Bradying it, and having your voice crack mid-song?
No, I kind of had a rough start, and then I kind of found my footing. But overall, it was not the shining moment that I would have hoped it would.
Right, damage would have been. Simon Cowell would have had a few words.
Yeah, I probably would have gotten taken off the stage, right?
Oh boy, how about if you can go back in time and whisper some words of advice to your younger self, what would you tell a younger Brianna?
I would tell a younger Brianna to stop trying to be a perfectionist a lot earlier than I did. I probably spent until my probably late 30s, really, I think, being caged by the perfectionism in a lot of ways. And it was really only when I started all of that auto writing that I finally was able to kind of let that go. Because, perfection is the enemy of progress. And I think I spent a lot of time, just kind of second guessing myself when I shouldn't have.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Sage advice for all you listeners out there. Brianna, if people want to learn more about you, do you have a website? Do you have any social media handles that you're active on?
Yeah, so they can, best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. So Brianna Sylver, that's Sylver. And then, of course, go to sylverconsulting.com, which is my organization, and you'll be able to find more information about the book there as well.
Very good. I'll be sure to put those links in our show notes so people can find it nice and easily. And Brianna, I will say thank you so much for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been so much fun.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlon uncork a new story.